In Elden Ring, the Crucible is described as having been the amorphous form of all life, a convergence of all life and matter that led to the creation of the world and creatures we see in-game. The Crucible on a surface level reminds me of the theory of the Big Bang, the idea that our universe was formed from a single point of immense matter and energy that expanded outward. Moreover, some scientists think that the universe may be on a rebound, and that if the Big Bang caused all of this matter to expand outward for a seemingly infinite distance, it could perhaps reach its limit, and once it has reached its limit, much like a rubber band, it's going to snap back to its starting position. The parallels between the Big Bang and the Crucible are readily apparent, especially as it appears that the lands between in Elden Ring are regressing, and this could relate to the law of regression in the Golden Order, which claims that all things yearn eternally to converge, much like the idea that one day the universe may end its expansion and begin its retraction. While I find these parallels to be fascinating, I am more compelled to relate the Crucible to mythological and theological interpretations of the inception of the universe, as I believe several creation myths relate to the concept of the Crucible in Elden Ring quite well. Before going further, I want to give my deepest gratitude to all of those who have subscribed recently and pushed my channel to over 500 subscribers. I can barely believe it. I've been doing this on and off for about 6 years now, and I didn't ever expect to have much of an audience. So thank you all so much for the love as well as your critiques on my recent videos, as well as for providing me with even more lore and theory info. I also want to say before digging deep into today's topics, that a great deal of the ideas and foundations for this video and the concepts therein are inspired by Smotown, Last Protagonist, and Mad Luigi. So I'm super grateful for their work, and hopefully you'll watch some of their videos if by some chance you haven't already. Now, my fellow Tarnished, let us rise and learn about the Crucible. Ginnungagap is the bottomless abyss that was all there was prior to the creation of the cosmos, and into which the cosmos will collapse once again during Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. As the Eddic poem Völuspá, the insight of the seeress, describes the time before the cosmos existed. That was the age when nothing was. There was no sand, nor sea, nor cool waves. No earth, nor sky, nor grass there. Only Ginnungagap. In Norse cosmogony, Ymir is the first being to arise from the abyss of Ginnungagap, the void that all life arose from. Though, unlike in Elden Ring, this void was not entirely alone, as Ginnungagap was positioned between Muspelheim, the land of fire, and Niflheim, the land of ice. When the fires of Muspelheim and the ice of Niflheim converged into Ginnungagap, Ymir was born out of the melting ice. Ymir was the first godlike being to arise, and from Ymir, other life arose, falling from his body. From Ymir came giants, as well as the first of the Aesir gods, Buri, whose son, Bur, would have children with a giantess named Bestla, and these half-god, half-giant offspring were Vili, Ve, and of course, Odin. Eventually, the gods came together to defeat Ymir so they could shape the universe, as little had actually changed other than the existence of life. Thus, once Odin and the other Aesir gods felled Ymir, they used his body to craft the universe from it, using his blood to make oceans and rivers, and using his skin and muscle to make land and vegetation, and so on. Following Ymir's defeat and the reordering of the chaotic cosmos, the gods created the first two humans from tree trunks, named Ask and Embla, and placed a fence around the land of the humans, Midgard, so that they could be protected from the wrath of the giants. Ymir can be viewed thematically and symbolically as the primordial matter from which all life arises, though it did rise in a void of nothingness, from a pit of chaos and disarray. Ymir is the personification of the concept of chaos, or at the very least, unattained potential, as there is no codification of principles, regulations, or beliefs. Instead, Ymir and the other Jotnar or Jotun, much like the Titans in Greek mythology, are more so representations of formless, chaotic elemental forces, such as freezing cold or scalding flames. Ymir's name can also be translated to Screamer, or to scream, and thus the gods took a formless body of the Screamer and metaphorically created words giving form to the scream. Moreover, as the giants serve a symbolic role of natural forces, it stands to reason that the giants are pretty much always in pursuit of corrupting and destroying the order of the gods, of which they actually succeed during Ragnarok. Though, the statement from medievalist Margaret Clooney's Ross paints the giants as more than chaotic forces of nature. Characteristically, the gods covet important natural resources, which the giants own, then steal them and turn them to their own advantage by utilizing them to create culture. That is, they put the giants' raw materials to work for themselves. These raw materials are of diverse kinds and include intellectual capital, such as the ability to brew ale, as well as the cauldron in which it is made, and abstractions made concrete, like the mead of poetry and the runes of wisdom. This quote is reminiscent of what we currently know about the Crucible and Elden Ring, primarily that all life comes from the Crucible, or Ginnungagap, and that this natural order was harnessed and utilized to create a new age of order and structure. From item descriptions, we can read that during the time of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, the Crucible Knights were a respected component of Godfrey's warriors, and seemingly only fell out of favor when Godfrey was banished by Marika to the Badlands. Moreover, the Crucible is described as being the natural order prior to the Elden Beast and Elden Ring, and it is seemingly associated with the tree that came before the Erd Tree, the Great Tree. The Great Tree and Erd Tree were said to once be connected at the roots, though this doesn't seem to be the case any longer. Now there is a myriad of hypotheses and theories as to why the Erd Tree and Great Tree are no longer connected, such as the creation of the Elden Ring or Godwyn being buried at the roots of the Erd Tree. However, we don't currently have any concrete information to say definitively as to why the Erd Tree and Great Tree are no longer connected. Though to speculate for a moment, I personally believe the Great Tree was the representation of the Crucible prior to the Elden Ring, and that the Elden Beast rocketed down into the lands between, and defeated the god of the Crucible and Great Tree. The primary piece of evidence for this is the sword that the Tarnished can obtain after defeating the Elden Beast and using the Elden Remembrance, the Sacred Relic Sword. I've been fascinated with this sword ever since I beat Elden Ring for the first time, and that fascination has only grown since beginning to hunt for lore. Initially, when I first got the sword in-game, I was just giddy at how incredibly overpowered the unique skill Wave of Gold was. And then I found myself reading the description of the sword. The description reads as follows: Sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. Thoughts on what the weapon portends are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of a great sin, or a sign of great devastation. Some think of it as the end of an age, while others, the beginning. To me, this is one of those item descriptions that perfectly encapsulates the concept of minimalism, as From Software is aware of what this description is referring to, yet we, the players and audience, could not know just from a cursory glance. The concept is akin to that of an iceberg, or iceberg lists in videos, as I'm sure many of you have seen before. Minimalism, in a literary sense, stresses brevity and minimal exposition, similar to the way From Software games are typically handled. This description tells us that there was once a god who should have never died, and that the death of this god is invariably viewed as an end or beginning of an age. We of course cannot be certain as to what god this description is referring to based on these words alone, though I do believe this to possibly have some major lore implications. The fact the Elden Beast wields the weapon in its fight against the Tarnished implies to me that this weapon is of great power and significance to the greater will. Though, why is this? As the description explains, this sword is crafted from the remains of a once-believed immortal deity. Moreover, the sword skill Wave of Gold scales only with faith, and the sword glows a fiery golden hue when used, implying that this now-deceased god, like the Elden Beast and disciples of the Golden Order, used holy magic to combat its foes. This is supported by the description of the skill, as it says you imbue the sword with bygone golden glory, then fire it at foes. If that weren't enough on its own, when the weapon skill Wave of Gold is used, the bottom rune of the Elden Ring can be seen lighting up on the ground where you cast Wave of Gold. This may suggest that the Elden Ring is invoking the power of this weapon, this now-deceased god, a god that may be connected to the Crucible. To me, this item description and visual details of the weapon lend themselves to the implications that the Elden Beast, or Greater Will, slayed the god of the Erd Tree, or Crucible, and out of their remains they crafted this sword and harnessed the power of this now-defeated god to enact their new age of the Golden Order. much as Ymir's body had been used to create order and structure in Norse cosmogony. The Great Tree, Crucible, or Unknown God is the plentiful source from which the Greater Will shaped its Elden Ring and Golden Order. Moreover, the description of the Sacred Relic Sword is quite reminiscent of how the Crucible can be described by different parties in the lands between, as those with connections to the Crucible would have seen the death of their Crucible God as the end of an age, whereas the disciples of the Greater Will would have seen the coming of the Erd Tree and Golden Order as the beginning of a new age, one wrought from the corpse of a powerful outer god we have yet to learn almost anything about. I will expand on this concept a bit later, but for now just know that there was a god that was defeated long ago that seems to have a connection to the Great Tree and Crucible, and is the weapon wielded by the Elden Beast within the Erd Tree, and that the Elden Ring could perhaps be some sort of containment vessel or refined form of the Crucible. The Crucible is described in-game as being the source of all life as well as the time when all life was blended together. Thus, if the Great Tree was representative of the Crucible prior to the emergence of the Erd Tree, then it would explain why the Crimson and Cerulean Amber medallions describe the amber as having primordial energy inside of them. The sap of the Erd Tree is considered to be blessed, and when it hardens it becomes amber, like the amber in the medallions. One of the wrinkles in this theory could be that the sap and amber in these medallions could have perhaps come from the Great Tree, though that may not invalidate the theory entirely, as the Erd Tree has grown out from the Great Tree. Thus, they may share the same blessed sap. I also find it difficult to determine definitively whether the sap in the Crimson and Cerulean Amber medallions is from the Great Tree or Erd Tree, as the items describe the amber in them as being the most valued jewelry items during the time when Godfrey was Elden Lord. This, along with the fact that the Crucible Knights served under Godfrey, makes me question the timeline of the Erd Tree sprouting up, and perhaps it's possible that the Erd Tree did not appear until after Godfrey was banished, though this is just speculation. I also find it fascinating that the Crucible was not always so despised among adherents of the Golden Order, and was seemingly tolerated at the very least, as can be seen in Crucible Knights who not only wear primordial gold, but wield aspects of the Crucible, and now fight alongside others who have connections to the Crucible, such as the Misbegotten. Interestingly, gold is significant and sacred to both the Crucible as well as the Golden Order. In Elden Ring, primordial gold is red-tinted, whereas the gold of the Golden Order is pure gold, yet they are both still, well, gold. The Crucible Knights wear primordial gold armor, and wield primordial gold weapons, and the Gravelstone seal item highlights that even an item relating to the dragons and Crucible was not always disdained by the Golden Order, with the description reading, "Sacred seal made from gravel stone thought to be an ancient dragon scale. Enhances dragon cult incantations of the royal capital. The worship of the ancient dragons does not conflict with the belief in the Erd Tree. After all, this seal and lightning itself are both imbued with gold." Both the red and gold forms of lightning in Elden Ring are representative of the Crucible and Golden Order, as the lightning wielded by dragons was likely harnessed directly from the Crucible, hence the red coloration. Moreover, the lightning wielded by Godwyn the Golden is that of a golden yellow because of his connection to the Golden Order in Elden Ring. However, this item does not differentiate between these types of lightning, which may suggest that both red and gold forms of lightning are holy and representative of power attained through the Crucible, with the golden lightning simply being the more refined version of this primordial energy. And yet, since the world was formed from the corpse of a giant, it would seem that the world is what it is largely due to the influence of the giants as well. Aspects of Ymir, his might, his uncouthness, his tendency toward entropy, the ambivalence of his character, remained present in the world even after the gods had shaped it in accordance with a different set of traits and aims. The giants too were thought to intervene in the world. The slaying of their ancestor by no means vanquished them. Much like in Norse mythology, everything in Elden Ring and the lands between is the direct product of Marika and the Greater Will usurping power from the Crucible. I find the described aspects of Ymir to be pertinent, as uncouthness could refer to lack of refinement, just as the Crucible lacked refinement until the Golden Order. The tendency toward entropy and ambivalence also seem relevant, as entropy can be seen in-game as the frenzied flame, as entropy is the gradual decline into disorder, and the frenzied flame wishes for nothing more than to bring about chaos and burn everything away until only the Crucible remains. In that regard, the frenzied flame can be viewed as an aspect or extension of the Crucible, as the frenzied flame seeks to converge all existence back into what it describes as the One Great, which is very likely the Crucible. Moreover, the quote describes that the world was still greatly influenced by its creation from Ymir's body, much like the Crucible seems to be the origin and influence of what we know as the Golden Order and the Erd Tree. The connection between Norse cosmogony and the Crucible and Elden Ring can also be found when reading the final line of this quote. As the gods and progenitors of many blasphemous and accursed beings in the lands between, having persisted despite the authority of the Golden Order, as the misbegotten and crucible knights continue to reside within the lands between. Despite scorning those with a connection to the Crucible, the adherents of the natural order continue to exist in battle against disciples of the Golden Order. In the Norse view, the world is a battleground between the gods and the giants, whose power is more or less evenly matched. Mankind is in the middle, torn between the opposing claims of holiness, order, and the goodness on the one hand, and profaneness, chaos, and wickedness on the other. This tension is ceaseless, because it's been a feature of the world itself since its very beginning. The strife will only be alleviated by Ragnarok, when the world will be destroyed altogether, and nothing will remain but the stillness and darkness of a new Ginnungagap. While not a perfect comparison, as the Crucible and Golden Order were on better terms at one point, the primary conflict in the lands between appears, at least to me, as being between the Golden Order and the aspects and extensions of the Crucible, which includes but is not limited to giants, misbegotten, omens, and crucible knights. The Golden Order is similar to the Norse Aesir gods in that they strive for holiness, order, and goodness, whereas it's propagated that the Crucible represents profaneness, chaos, and wickedness. In his video about omens and the Crucible, Mad Luigi discussed the Crucible talismans, which describes the aspects of the Crucible once having appeared on the flesh of human beings long ago, and can be partially attributed to a form of devolution, which works quite well with the law of regression perhaps actually working as a detriment to the Golden Order, as they were quickly being overtaken by aspects and vestiges of the Crucible. And if you'd like to hear more about my thoughts on the law of regression, I actually went much more in-depth on that topic in my Godwin the Golden video, so if you're interested, you can go check that one out after this. Anyway, I really liked what Mad Luigi said about the current state of omens versus the state of omens long ago, which is that perhaps during the time of the Crucible, the vestiges and aspects of the Crucible were more uniformly spread out and perhaps were beneficial, unlike how now an omen such as Moog has horns growing mad crazy and stabbing into his own eyeball. I think it's a pretty great idea that the Crucible had its own order and grace of sorts that was bestowed, perhaps more equally, among the lands. Though, as Mad Luigi also points out, not even the Omen twins wished to get back to the time of the Crucible, so perhaps it still wasn't all that great, as it perhaps did not involve much individuality. Nonetheless, being born an Omen during the current age of the Golden Order certainly isn't to anyone's benefit. Another interesting item and symbol is the Erd Tree seal, as this is what appears when aspects of the Crucible incantations are used. Furthermore, the Crucible incantations are described as ancient Erd Tree incantations, reinforcing the connection between the Erd Tree and the Crucible. They are also described as being manifestations of the Erd Tree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible. These descriptions greatly reinforce, to me anyway, that the Erd Tree draws upon or has refined the essence of the Crucible itself. Thus the Golden Order is likely tied to the Crucible itself, yet currently scorns and degrades the Crucible nonetheless, the probable source of the Elden Ring's power. I'm also deeply curious as to why Godfrey was banished, and why this is also when the Crucible began to be despised by the Golden Order, with my wildest hypothesis on this being that there was a god in control of the Great Tree or Crucible prior to the Greater Will, and that it wasn't until that god was killed and formed into the Sacred Relic Sword did the Erd Tree sprout. Though that is just an idea I really like, but there's not really a whole lot of evidence to support it, other than perhaps implications presented by the Sacred Relic Sword, though there are possibly some timeline issues with it. I wonder if the Great Tree or Erd Tree could parallel the Well of Erd in Norse mythology, as this is one of the 3 wells that support Yggdrasil, though the Well of Erd is the one that controls the fate of the tree in that it keeps the tree healthy. Moreover, this is where the Norns, the weavers of all fate for mankind, were located, and through Yggdrasil could change the fate and laws of the cosmos, much as whosoever holds the Elden Ring can in the lands between. A commenter recently posited the idea that the Outer Gods are Lovecraftian perversions of the Norns, and I kind of agree with that. The Outer Gods largely reside outside of the lands between, hence the term Outer Gods, and perhaps outside of this realm of existence entirely, which is very Lovecraftian in nature, especially as they can influence the world while they are not even present. Moreover, they could be representative of the Norns in that they are all staking claim to what can be viewed as a Well of Erd, with the Elden Ring effectively being able to change the fate of those in the lands between. Moreover, they could be representative of the Norns in that they are all staking claim to what can be viewed as a Well of Erd, with the Elden Ring effectively being able to change the fate of those in the lands between. So, while just speculation, perhaps the Erd Tree or Great Tree is simply the center of power in the universe, as is perhaps the representation of the Crucible in some form, and the powerful Outer Gods wish to claim this for themselves. Regardless of whether or not that parallel holds any weight, I wonder if there was another god that the Greater Will usurped power from that resided within the Great Tree. If this were so, then perhaps this is the same god that the dragons once worshipped. After all, we don't really know what happened to the god of the dragons, nor do we have a name either. Though, what we do know is that Placidusax was once an Elden Lord in an age predating the Erd Tree and Golden Order. This has always been such an interesting part of the lore to me, as it of course conflicts with Godfrey being the first Elden Lord, though perhaps Godfrey was the first Elden Lord with the Greater Will in control of the Elden Ring. This seems to fit with the Sacred Relic Sword description as well, as the power in the lands changing from one outer god to another would be seen as both the beginning and end of an age, particularly if the Erd Tree were to have sprouted once the god was slain. We also know that the aspects and vestiges of the Crucible can be variably described as both dragon-like as well as beast-like. The tail, horns, and flame-breathing would all suggest a dragon or lizard-like being, which isn't all that dramatic considering the Greater Will's seemingly aquatic appearance. Moreover, we've never really seen an outer god in its true form, so who knows if there are any limits on what they could look like, and this could perhaps lend itself to the Lovecraftian aspect. However, what the Outer Gods are exactly is quite the mystery thus far, though I do personally believe the Sacred Relic Sword is hinting at something significant, such as the previous wielder of the Elden Ring, or the power of the Crucible, or whatever significance or power the Erd Tree and Great Tree hold. The weapon is wielded by the Elden Beast, who also likely forged it into the Sacred Relic Sword to use in battle, as clearly a great deal of holy energy remains in the blade, perhaps remnants of the god's life force that was once connected to the Great Tree. Whether or not this god would have been representative of the dragons, the Crucible, or both, is hard to say, as connections can be made but nothing can really be confirmed without a shadow of a doubt. But that's what makes all of this so much fun. It's like we're all a bunch of detectives. Placidusax can breathe a golden flame reminiscent of the holy magic used in the Golden Order and by the Elden Ring, as well as the Sacred Relic Sword, and this is probably a vestige of his time as Elden Lord, when he was connected to the Great Tree and his outer god, who or whatever they may be. One final note is that the Elden Beast is said to be the Elden Ring itself, which again leads me to believe that the Elden Ring is a containment unit of power of some sort that is linked to the Great Tree and now Erd Tree, and by extension, the Crucible, as Placidusax couldn't have been Elden Lord prior to there having been some variation at least of the Elden Ring. This also seems to fit well with the idea that the power to control and alter the laws of the lands between is connected to the Great Tree and Erd Tree, and Crucible in some way, and thus outer gods seek to control the power concentrated therein. Though, to be honest, I've tried to piece as many bits of information together I could in order to try and create a coherent idea of what the Crucible is and represents and how it may relate to a deceased outer god. But a great deal of it could be boiled down to speculation, though I'd like to believe I presented my case quite well. And, as I mentioned earlier, I just feel like everyone who makes or watches videos like this one are just detectives trying to piece together what everything means and how all of these vague and convoluted pieces fit together. I almost certainly will never get everything correct, especially when theorizing about such obscure and abstract topics like the Crucible. But I find that to be an enjoyable aspect of it all, as I'm always learning and hypothesizing about new things the more I dig into the lore. Thank you so much for watching this far. I know it's no Smotown video, but I really appreciate you watching until the end. I'm hoping to have a few more Elden Ring and Dark Souls videos out in the next few weeks, and I've also got some ideas for some non-From Software video ideas, so I can maybe branch out a little bit, but I don't really plan to stop making lore videos anytime soon, as I have a blast researching and making these. Anyways, that's about all I've got for you. So if you like this one, maybe think about dropping a like and maybe subscribing if you haven't already. Check out some of my other fabulous videos if they catch your fancy, and I'll talk at you in the next one.